The Ridgeline Shooting Complex was a prestigious facility nestled in the mountains of Colorado, a place where marksmen from all over the country came to train, compete, and sharpen their skills. The morning sun cast long shadows across the expansive outdoor range as flags waved gently in the breeze. Black SUVs, each one more intimidating than the last, pulled up to the complex one after another. The men who emerged were a striking sight, tall, confident, clad in tactical gear, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses. They were the Silver Eagles, an elite shooting team known for their precision, their arrogance, and their unwavering belief that no one could outshoot them. As they unloaded their gear, laughter and jokes filled the air. The team members joked about the upcoming regional championship, bantering back and forth about their chances to take home the gold. The Silver Eagles had no doubt about their superiority. They'd earned it in their eyes through years of rigorous training and unyielding focus. They were the best, and they knew it. But among the hustle and bustle of the complex, one car stood out, a modest sedan, not nearly as imposing as the high-end vehicles surrounding it. Elizabeth Thompson, a 68-year-old woman with a gray bob in a steady, purposeful stride, stepped out. Her clothes were simple, a beige jacket, comfortable pants, and sensible shoes. She looked more like someone's grandmother than a shooter. But what no one knew was that Elizabeth Thompson was no ordinary woman, and she had come to the Ridgeline Shooting Complex for a reason far beyond what anyone could imagine. As she walked into the lobby, the chatter from the Silver Eagles quieted. Heads turned, and a few whispers rippled through the room. Elizabeth's entrance had an odd effect on the otherwise confident group of shooters. To them, she was an anomaly. She didn't belong here. She didn't look like she belonged here. The receptionist, a young woman with a bright smile, looked up in confusion as Elizabeth approached. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, her tone polite but tinged with curiosity. Elizabeth smiled warmly. "I have a reservation for the precision rifle range. Elizabeth Thompson," she said, handing over her reservation details. The receptionist glanced at the screen, confusion crossing her face as she double-checked the information. "Oh, I see it here," she said slowly, her eyes widening slightly. "Have you been here before?" "First time," Elizabeth replied with a soft chuckle. "My nephew gave me the session as a birthday gift, said I should try something new." Another round of smirks passed through the lobby. Elizabeth's age, her unassuming presence, her modest attire, it all screamed, beginner. The whispers grew louder, and the Silver Eagles exchanged glances, amused by the thought of this elderly woman trying her hand at a sport they took so seriously. But Elizabeth pretended not to notice. She had learned a long time ago not to be fazed by the opinions of others. As the receptionist handed her the necessary forms to sign, the door opened, and Connor Walsh, the head instructor at Ridgeline, stepped inside. Tall and fit, Connor was the epitome of the modern instructor. Confident, athletic, and always ready to take charge. His perfectly styled hair and tight black t-shirt showcased his physique, and his gaze took in Elizabeth with an air of polite amusement. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Connor. I'll be your instructor today," he said with a smile, though his tone held a hint of condescension. "Have you ever fired a rifle before?" Elizabeth adjusted her glasses, offering him a serene smile. "Oh, it's been quite some time. I might need a refresher." Connor's smile faltered and he nodded, his eyes flicking to the Silver Eagles behind her. "Don't worry, we'll start with the basics," he said, his voice a little louder than necessary, as if explaining to a child. The Silver Eagles watched, stifling laughter. The thought of this grandmother trying her hand at precision shooting seemed laughable to them. They exchanged knowing glances, their amusement growing as they set up their own positions on the range. After all, they were preparing for the regional championship, and they took every opportunity to remind everyone of their experience. Elizabeth was clearly not a threat. Connor led her to a shooting station far from the prime positions taken by the Silver Eagles. The outdoor precision range stretched out for 1,000 yards, with targets positioned at various distances. Connor set up a paper target at just 50 yards, a very basic distance. He began to explain the fundamentals of rifle handling, speaking slowly and carefully, as if teaching a child how to ride a bike. "Here's the stock," Connor said, pointing to the rifle with exaggerated care. "And here's the trigger, Safety first, right? Elizabeth nodded politely. That sounds perfect. Elizabeth nodded politely. That sounds perfect, she said, though she knew exactly what he was doing. She had been in far more dangerous situations before, had handled weapons far more advanced than this one, but she didn't mind playing the role of the beginner. After all, she had a reputation to uphold. As Connor adjusted her stance and explained proper breathing techniques, Elizabeth quietly observed the Silver Eagles. They were setting up their expensive equipment with precision, adjusting their scopes, and preparing for the competition. But Elizabeth didn't feel the need to prove herself just yet. Instead, she focused on what mattered: the feel of the rifle in her hands, the wind direction, the weight of the target in her mind. Marcus Bennett, the leader of the Silver Eagles, wandered over, his curiosity getting the better of him. He leaned against a nearby bench, watching Connor position Elizabeth's arms and adjust her grip repeatedly. "New to shooting, ma'am?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You sure you don't want to start with something lighter?" Elizabeth smiled sweetly. "Oh, yes. My late husband had hunting rifles, but I never touched them. Thought I'd see what all the fuss is about." The comment earned a few chuckles from the Silver Eagles, but Elizabeth simply let it slide. She didn't need to react. She knew that every dismissive glance, every laugh, was another opportunity to prove them wrong. Connor, not realizing how much he was underestimating her, continued his slow, methodical instruction. But Elizabeth, despite her seemingly slow movements, was already calculating everything: the distance, the wind, the tension in the rifle's trigger. Every shot she fired, even the ones that missed, was part of a grander strategy, a strategy she knew would pay off when the time was right. As the Silver Eagles continued their mocking comments, Elizabeth remained steady, ignoring their taunts and focusing only on her form. She knew the truth. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but soon they would. This was just the beginning. As the session progressed, the Silver Eagles grew more and more brazen in their taunts. They had been underestimating Elizabeth from the moment she stepped onto the range, and now their arrogance knew no bounds. Elizabeth, however, remained calm, her face a picture of composure despite the rising pressure. She was no stranger to judgment, to the dismissive glances of those who thought they knew more than they really did. What they didn't know was that she was playing a long game, and she would make them regret every sneer. Connor, still trying to maintain a professional demeanor, continued to provide guidance, though his patience was wearing thin. Elizabeth's first few shots missed entirely, but she wasn't discouraged. She made small adjustments, focusing on the fundamentals, taking her time. But Connor, eager to prove himself as the best instructor in the facility, continued to hover over her with forced encouragement. "That's okay, Mrs. Thompson," he said, trying to be reassuring, but clearly frustrated. "It's your first time. Let's adjust your stance a little." Elizabeth nodded, though in reality she already knew exactly what she was doing. She'd spent enough time around firearms to recognize that the problem wasn't her skills. It was the unfamiliar rifle and the pressure of her audience. The equipment was different from what she was used to, and the target was closer than what she was accustomed to shooting. Yet she played her role, meek, willing to be instructed, never letting on that she was more than capable. Marcus, standing off to the side, exchanged looks with the rest of the Silver Eagles. He couldn't resist coming over again. "You sure you're all right with that?" he asked. His tone was a mix of mock sympathy and amusement. "I mean, this range isn't exactly for beginners, and you don't want to hurt yourself with that rifle. Maybe you should try something a little more your speed." Elizabeth smiled politely. "I think this will be fine," she replied softly, adjusting her glasses, though her mind was sharp and calculating. Her hands were steady. She could feel the wind moving slightly across her skin and the faint tug of the rifle's weight as she held it. The Silver Eagles, though they'd been quiet for a moment, started laughing again. "A little too much gun for her," one muttered under his breath, earning a chuckle from the others. Ryan, the youngest member of the group, walked over to his phone and began recording, a smirk on his face. "I'm just going to get this on tape. Grandma's first day on the range," Ryan said, shaking his head as he filmed. The sound of his voice was laced with mockery. Elizabeth didn't flinch. She focused on the target again, taking a deep breath, trying to tune out the noise around her. She had been in more hostile environments than this, faced more intense scrutiny, and survived far greater pressures. She wasn't going to let a group of arrogant men break her focus. By now, some of the Silver Eagles were calling out. "Come on, Mrs. Thompson, show us what you've got," one of them yelled, taunting her openly. Another piped up, "Maybe try the kiddie range next time. Your grandson's waiting for you." The comments were becoming less subtle, but Elizabeth remained unshaken. She took another shot. This time, the bullet skimmed the edge of the target. Close, but not enough. "Almost," Connor said with a forced smile, but it was clear he was losing interest. "Let's move back a bit. The 75-yard target, maybe?" Elizabeth nodded, still focused, though she was aware that the group had begun to shift from mocking to quietly calculating. The whispers were less dismissive now, more curious. She had a way of drawing people in, a quiet magnetism they didn't quite understand. The shooting range, once filled with taunts and laughter, began to quiet as the Silver Eagles watched her hit the 75-yard target consistently, albeit with only moderate precision. There was still a distance between her shots, but her consistency was undeniable. "She's improving," Connor said, trying to hide his surprise, but it was obvious even to him that Elizabeth wasn't as out of her depth as he had assumed. "Let's see how she does at 100 yards. At this distance, Elizabeth's shots were less accurate, but her determination never wavered. The Silver Eagles began to gather in a loose circle around her, some watching with genuine curiosity now, while others were still caught between disbelief and amusement. "That's impressive for a first-timer," Marcus said, his voice no longer laced with mockery, but with genuine respect. He crossed his arms, studying her. "You're not bad for an old lady." Elizabeth smiled faintly but didn't respond to the remark. Instead, she focused on the target, adjusting the rifle with a calm precision that betrayed her years of experience. She wasn't a beginner. She wasn't just a grandmother trying to learn something new. She was a sniper, an expert in this craft, and the time was coming when she would show them all who they were really dealing with. The tension in the air was palpable now. The Silver Eagles had begun to doubt themselves. What started as a laughable spectacle was beginning to turn into something else entirely. Connor watched with growing unease. He could see it in their faces. The laughter was gone, replaced by uncertainty. They were beginning to realize that the woman they had mocked was not what she appeared to be, and it unsettled them. Elizabeth knew it was time. Time to show them just how wrong they had been. But for now, she remained quiet, pretending to struggle with the 100-yard target, deliberately allowing them to continue underestimating her. They hadn't seen anything yet. "Maybe I'll try something a bit further," she murmured quietly, her voice barely rising above the wind. Connor, sensing her growing confidence, hesitated. "That's a bit much for a beginner," he cautioned. But Elizabeth was already walking towards her bag. She smiled inwardly. The game was about to change. The Silver Eagles, still unsure of what they were witnessing, gathered around, all eyes on Elizabeth. What they didn't know was that she wasn't just any shooter. She was a legend in her field, and they were about to find out just how much they had underestimated her. As the Silver Eagles huddled together, a wave of doubt washed over them. Elizabeth had been shooting with a consistency that they couldn't ignore anymore, even if they wanted to. The laughs had died down, and now only murmurs and unsure glances bounced between the group. They'd spent the afternoon teasing her, underestimating her at every step, but her steady improvement had planted a seed of uncertainty in their minds. Could this elderly woman really be a skilled marksman? The wind rustled the grass, and the gentle hum of the range was broken only by the distant sound of gunfire from the Silver Eagles as they resumed their training. Elizabeth, however, had stopped pretending to be anything less than what she truly was. She was no beginner. Elizabeth calmly set down her rifle, her eyes scanning the distance. The target was a mere 100 yards away, but the next challenge loomed in her mind. This was child's play. She had been in tougher situations before, dealing with far more complex targets. She looked around at the Silver Eagles, sensing the shift in their attitudes. They were no longer laughing. Instead, they were watching her with keen eyes, sizing her up. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth walked towards her duffel bag, her movements purposeful. The Silver Eagle's eyes followed her, some exchanging glances as they wondered what she was up to. Elizabeth reached for the handle of her bag and unzipped it slowly. The sound of the zipper echoed across the range, louder than it should have been. She pulled out a worn leather rifle case. Nothing flashy, nothing new. The gun inside was a far cry from the pristine, high-tech rifles they used, but Elizabeth knew exactly what it could do. The murmurs from the Silver Eagles started again. A few of them exchanged skeptical glances, but none dared say anything. They were still uncertain what she was about to do, but they couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that she had something up her sleeve. Elizabeth gently opened the leather case, revealing a precision rifle that gleamed with silent confidence. Her fingers grazed the metal, like a pianist touching the keys of an old piano. The rifle wasn't much to look at, certainly not compared to the high-end gear the Silver Eagles were using. But to someone who knew what they were looking at, it was a masterpiece, a custom-built precision rifle. Connor stepped forward, his curiosity piqued, but there was still a glint of skepticism in his eyes. "That's quite a rifle," he remarked, his voice cautious now. "Where did you get it?" Elizabeth met his gaze with a calm smile, her eyes twinkling slightly. "A gift from an old friend," she replied cryptically. She wasn't just any shooter. She was a legendary marksman, someone who had seen the highest level of competition, someone whose name was known in shooting circles around the world. The rifle in her hands wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of her. Every part of it was perfectly aligned with her mind and body, honed over years of precision and skill. As she assembled the rifle, the Silver Eagles fell silent. It was as though they were witnessing the calm before a storm. Elizabeth's movements were deliberate, methodical, almost graceful. The rifle seemed to fit her as if it had been made for her specifically. When she was ready, she stood up and adjusted the rifle on the shooting bench, her eyes briefly closing as she felt the weight of the rifle in her hands. The sound of distant gunfire seemed to fade away. The only thing she heard was the sound of her own breathing. The air felt different now, more charged, more alive. "Elizabeth, are you sure about this?" Connor asked, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Elizabeth simply nodded, her smile soft but knowing. "Let's see if the rifle can do what I need it to." The Silver Eagles, standing at a distance, now watched with rapt attention. They had laughed earlier. They had mocked her. But now they were starting to realize that there was more to Elizabeth than met the eye. She wasn't just an old lady with a hobby. She was a woman who commanded respect. Elizabeth adjusted the scope on the rifle, her eyes narrowing slightly as she focused. She wasn't concerned about the Silver Eagles or their judgment. She wasn't even concerned about the target in front of her. Not yet. Instead, she was listening to the wind, watching how the grass moved, gauging the distance with an almost supernatural precision. 1,000 yards, she said softly to herself, almost as if she was calculating the shot in her mind before it even happened. The Silver Eagles, having no idea what she was capable of, had no reason to doubt her yet. Connor, still unsure, motioned for Marcus to join him by the spotting scope. "Are you sure about this?" Connor muttered. "It's a long shot. It's practically impossible for someone without experience to hit that target. Even our team doesn't always manage it." "Let's just see," Marcus replied, his tone doubtful yet intrigued. Elizabeth took a slow breath, centering herself. The range had gone eerily quiet. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. They were all waiting for her to fail. She exhaled, settled into position, and squeezed the trigger. The sound of the rifle's crack echoed across the range. The target at 1,000 yards didn't seem to move. The air was still. Marcus, still peering through the spotting scope, blinked. He stared at the target, unsure of what he was seeing. That can't be," he muttered under his breath. "Did she hit it?" Connor asked, his voice trembling slightly. Marcus didn't respond at first. His hands were shaking as he adjusted the scope, focusing in on the target. And then in a voice filled with disbelief, he finally spoke. That's a hit." The group of Silver Eagles, who had been watching with smug amusement, fell completely silent. Even the range officer, who had been walking past, stopped in his tracks and looked over at the target. Connor stood frozen for a moment, his mouth slightly agape. He had watched Elizabeth miss repeatedly earlier, and now, just like that, she had hit a target that was considered out of reach for most seasoned shooters. "Impossible," Marcus whispered. "She can't," but she did. Elizabeth, her expression serene, calmly chambered another round, all while the Silver Eagles stared at her in stunned silence. She fired again. Another hit. And another. By the third shot, Elizabeth had formed a perfect triangle on the target. The Silver Eagles stood there, mouths wide open, their earlier mockery completely gone. Connor slowly lowered the spotting scope, his face pale, his pride shattered. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth sat up slowly, her hands steady as she placed the rifle down on the shooting bench. She looked at Connor and the rest of the team with a small smile. "Just an old woman trying out a new hobby," she said, her voice warm but carrying an underlying confidence. The Silver Eagles stood there, dumbfounded, unsure of what had just happened. They had been so certain they were the best, but this woman, this grandmother, had just outshot them all. And it wasn't just a fluke. It was skill. It was precision. It was the result of years of experience they couldn't even fathom. "Let's just say I've been doing this longer than you've been alive," Elizabeth added quietly, with a hint of a smile. The once conceited team was now completely humbled. They didn't know it yet, but their lives had just been changed by a woman who had been underestimated from the very beginning. The silence on the range was deafening. The echoes of Elizabeth's perfectly placed shots seemed to linger in the air long after the rifle's crack had faded away. The Silver Eagles, once a group of confident, arrogant shooters, now stood frozen, their disbelief palpable. What they had thought was just an amusing spectacle, an elderly woman trying to take on an expert-level challenge, had turned into a lesson in humility. Elizabeth wasn't just a beginner, she was a legend in disguise. Connor stood back, his hands trembling slightly as he processed what had just happened. Elizabeth had hit the 1,000-yard target 3 times in a row, each shot closer to the center than the last. It was something only the most skilled marksman could dream of achieving, and yet this woman, this grandmother, had done it without breaking a sweat. "Mrs. Thompson, Elizabeth," Connor said, his voice finally coming back to him. I owe you an apology." His words were humble, but there was a sense of awe in his tone that he hadn't had earlier. "I misjudged you. I didn't know who I was dealing with." Elizabeth looked at him, a gentle smile on her face. "You're not the first," she said quietly, her eyes sparkling with quiet amusement. "But you should know, it's not always about what you see on the surface. Sometimes the most unassuming people are the ones with the greatest stories." The Silver Eagles had gathered around. Their earlier mockery evaporated completely. Instead, they now looked at Elizabeth with a newfound respect, the arrogance in their demeanor replaced by admiration. They had been schooled, not just in shooting, but in humility. "Can you teach us?" Marcus asked, his voice almost hesitant now, no longer the confident leader who had been mocking her earlier. He was genuinely curious. "We've been practicing for years, but we've never seen shooting like that before. How do you do it?" Elizabeth chuckled softly, the sound like the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. "It's not about the equipment," she said. "It's about understanding the environment, the wind, the moment. It's about feeling what's around you, not just looking at it." She paused, her gaze flicking over to Connor. "And it's about control of the rifle and of yourself." Marcus nodded slowly, taking in her words. "I get it," he said, a new light in his eyes. "You've been trained in ways we don't even understand. How long have you been doing this?" Elizabeth gave him a cryptic smile, not answering directly. Instead, she turned to Connor. "Let's just say I've had my fair share of experiences," she replied, her voice laced with a quiet confidence that resonated with years of expertise. The entire group now gathered around Elizabeth, eager to learn, to absorb whatever knowledge she was willing to share. Even the younger members of the Silver Eagles, who had been the most vocal in their mockery, now approached her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Ryan, who had once filmed her with the intent of making fun of her, now stood with a sheepish expression, his phone tucked away in his pocket. "I'd be happy to show you some techniques," Elizabeth said, turning to Marcus. "But first you need to understand that shooting isn't just about pulling the trigger. It's about balance, breathing, focus. Your body is just as important as the rifle in your hands. Without control of both, you'll never be able to shoot consistently. As she spoke, she moved around the range, demonstrating techniques that had been passed down to her through years of practice. The Silver Eagles followed her instructions carefully, eager to fix their form, their grip, and their breathing. The transformation in the group was striking. Where arrogance had once reigned, now there was openness, humility, and a desire to improve. For the next hour, Elizabeth worked with each member of the Silver Eagles, offering tips and corrections in a gentle but firm manner. She showed them how to adjust their stance, how to recognize the subtle shifts in the wind, and how to breathe deeply to steady their shots. With every adjustment, the team's shooting improved. Their once tight and erratic groupings began to spread out less, each shot finding its mark with more consistency. "Better," Elizabeth said with a nod, watching as Marcus hit the target he had once struggled to hit with precision. "You're getting there, but remember, there's always room for improvement." After the lesson, the Silver Eagles gathered in a tight huddle, talking in hushed tones. Their earlier disdain for Elizabeth had completely dissolved. They now saw her for what she truly was, not just a skilled shooter, but someone whose wisdom and humility had been tested by time. Connor approached Elizabeth one last time. "Mrs. Thompson, I've never met anyone like you," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I'd like to invite you to be a guest instructor here. We could all learn a lot from you." Elizabeth smiled, though she could see the sincerity in Connor's eyes. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice light but knowing. "But remember, teaching isn't just about the skill. It's about understanding the people you're teaching, knowing when to push them and when to hold back. It's about the heart as much as the head." As the day drew to a close, Elizabeth packed up her rifle, her demeanor calm and content. The Silver Eagles, who had once scoffed at her, now watched her with admiration as she walked to her car. They knew they had just experienced something extraordinary, and they would never forget the lesson she had taught them. Not just about shooting, but about respect, humility, and the true meaning of mastery. Connor, watching her walk away, turned to the team. "We've learned a lot today. We'll be back next week, and I'll make sure we all remember what she taught us. Never judge a book by its cover." The team nodded in agreement, their pride humbled. It wasn't just Elizabeth's skill they had learned to appreciate. It was the quiet power she carried, the lessons she had imparted without ever needing to prove herself. They would never again underestimate the unassuming woman who had just shown them what true mastery looked like. As Elizabeth's car disappeared from view, the Silver Eagles gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. They had come to the range as a group of confident, arrogant shooters, but they were leaving as a team that had been transformed by the humbling presence of one woman. A woman who, against all odds, had proven that real strength comes not from bragging or boasting, but from quiet confidence, wisdom, and the ability to learn. The lesson was simple but powerful. Underestimating others can be your biggest mistake, and the true measure of a person lies not in their appearance, but in their actions. I used to believe I had everything. Everything I ever wanted, everything that the world told me I should have. A prominent family name, a legacy that stretched back for generations. A thriving business, Davis Enterprises, built from the ground up by my husband and me. And most importantly, a son, William, who would carry the Davis legacy forward into the future. He was the crown jewel of everything we had worked for. Our pride and joy. The one thing that had always kept our family together. But it wasn't as perfect as it seemed. No one could see that at first. Not even me. I had convinced myself that my decisions were always right, that every action we took in shaping our son's future was for his benefit. But when I think back, I see how wrong I was. I see how my pride and prejudice clouded my judgment and led me to make decisions that would hurt not only my son, but also the woman he once loved, Amara, and the child I had never known. The day everything changed, everything I thought I knew about my family came crashing down. I was sitting in my study, sipping my tea, going through the usual piles of paperwork that came with running a multi-billion-dollar corporation, when I got the phone call. My assistant's voice on the other end was filled with urgency, yet still maintaining a polite tone that hinted at something being terribly wrong. Mrs. Davis, there's been a situation. A young boy, Noah, called Mr. William today. He called him Dad. The boy's mother is in the emergency room, and Noah asked William to pick him up. My assistant's voice trembled slightly, the words still echoing in my ears. I thought you should know. The words were like a bolt of lightning. Noah! The name struck me like a whisper from the past I had desperately tried to bury. It was a name I hadn't heard in years, a name I never expected to hear again. But there it was, piercing through the silence of my office, the sharp reminder of a chapter in our lives that we had tried so hard to close. I didn't know why, but I felt an immediate rush of nausea and dread. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. How could this be? Noah, the son of Amara, my son's former love? Memories of those days rushed back in a painful flood. Memories I had long buried beneath layers of wealth, power, and pride. I remembered the love William had for Amara. I remembered the strength of their bond, their passion for each other, but I also remembered the way we tore them apart, my husband and I, believing that we were protecting our son's future. We had done everything in our power to keep them apart. We had used our influence, our wealth, and our status to drive a wedge between them, to make sure that William would never marry Amara. She wasn't the right one for him, we told ourselves. She wasn't from the right background. She wasn't even the right race. Looking back now, I can see how wrong we were, how cruel we were to make those decisions for him. William had been young, in love, and so deeply connected to Amara. But we had believed that his future, his legacy, was more important than the woman he loved, more important than his happiness.